Trasciatti. I am the daughter of a garment worker, no, not at Triangle, a Long Beach resident, so many of my neighbors are here. And I am president of Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition, as well as a professor at Hofstra University. Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition helps to organize the annual commemoration of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. If you're interested, the beautiful cards are available in the back to give you information about where and when. This year, it will be on March 24th at 11:30 at the corner of Washington Place and Green Streets in New York City, in the Village. The fire itself was on March 25th, 1911, just before closing time on an early spring Saturday afternoon. An ash from a cutter's cigarette. And we actually think we know who that cutter was. His son, Martin Abramowitz, is a member of the coalition, and Israel Abramowitz was 18 years old when he started working at the Triangle. And it is, we believe, Martin, his son, believes that it is the ash from Israel's cigarette that fell into the bin of scraps of cloth and ignited a fire on the 8th floor of the Triangle Waist Company. A waist or a shirtwaist, as you may know or may not, is a woman's tailored blouse. The Triangle Waist Factory was housed on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of what was then called the Ash Building and what is now called the Brown Building. It's an NYU science building. And it is at the corner of Washington and Green, just a block east of Washington Square Park. The building itself was fireproof, but minimal precautions were taken to protect the people who worked in it. You might say, well, why didn't the union mandate safety for its workers? Triangle was not a union shop, and that's one of the sad ironies of this story. A walkout at the Triangle factory precipitated one of the most famous strikes in U.S. labor history, the 1909 uprising of the 20,000. And as the name suggests, at least 20,000 workers, most of them Jewish women, led by the Russian immigrant organizer Clara Lemlich, struck for better working conditions, better wages, and union recognition. Their strike, and they were treated brutally by police, they were beaten up. Clara Lemlich had several ribs broken, but they persevered. And in fact, one of the things that protected them was that middle and upper class women came and joined ranks with them to protect them from being beaten, essentially. And this strike succeeded in bringing the union shop to many factories in the garment industry, but not to Triangle. Owners Max Blank and Isaac Harris refused to recognize a union for their workers. So without a union, and without enforceable laws to protect workers, the factory system was a tragedy waiting to happen. Workers were packed together to maximize the use of space within the factory because more production means more profit. Cloth fibers filled the air so that when the fire broke out, the air itself literally was on fire. There were no fire drills, so panic ensued because no one knew what to do. There was no sprinkler system, just a few buckets. There were faulty fire escapes. Indeed, when people attempted to escape down the fire escape, it collapsed under their weight and they were impaled and died that way. The doors to the factory opened inward, so imagine that. You have hundreds of people. There were about 500 people working that day. Imagine hundreds of people trying to get out of doors in a panic that opened inward. And according to workers at the trial, the doors were locked. These owners the workers many of them were accused of lying, but their testimony was that the doors were locked to prevent girls from stealing, so they had to go out a particular exit, and to prevent union organizers from coming into the fire. When all was said and done, everything, all total, the fire itself was about 15 minutes. The whole process probably lasted about a half an hour. There were 146 dead, most of them on the 9th floor, approximately 60 of whom jumped to their death. They splattered on the sidewalk in front of passersby and others who gathered and watched in horror. One reporter, the young William Gunn Shepherd, was on hand, and he telephoned his eyewitness account to his editor at the New York World. And so stories of Triangle reverberated throughout the U.S. and the global press with illustrations and images to break your heart. The funerals lasted for days and the routes crisscrossed. According to Leon Stein, there were times when people weren't quite sure what funeral procession they were marching in. So many were the funerals. The neighborhood on the Lower East Side was devastated. As you probably know, that was a large immigrant community. The largest funeral was held in early April. for a Union procession for the unidentified dead. There were 7 whose bodies were so charred that they were beyond recognition. 100,000 marched silently in the rain, and 400,000 total participated. Owners Max Blank and Isaac Harris went on to open other factories. They were found not guilty in the trial about whether or not they knew that the doors were locked, and they continued to be cited for safety violations. But if we focused on this, we would miss the whole story of Triangle. This is an episode of labor history with a positive note. People who watched the fire were determined to do something. So unions stepped up their organizing, and politicians got down to business. The Factory Investigating Committee was established in the state of New York. And Frances Perkins, a name that might be familiar to many of you, who was at the time a young social worker drinking tea with a friend in Washington Square Park and who saw the fire, became an investigator for the commission. She toured factories and offered her findings to the New York State Legislature. Hers and the findings of other investigators informed landmark legislation for safety passed by New York State. So when you look around this room or any other room that you find yourself in and see exit signs, sprinklers, maximum occupancy limits, outward opening doors, etc., you know, after today, that all of these are legacy of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. But other aspects of the legacy of the fire are less common, but no less important. Social Security, and don't hold this against me, but it looks like there are probably some recipients of Social Security in the audience. Social Security, the Wagner Act, which recognizes collective bargaining in unions, et cetera, the New Deal, in other words, began, according to Frances Perkins, first female cabinet member, labor secretary under Franklin Roosevelt. The New Deal began on March 25th, 1911. That's a quote. Triangle showed us that the state has a role in protecting us from the worst aspects of ourselves. And the pursuit of unfettered profit is one of those worst aspects. This moment, the hard-won victories of the New Deal are imperiled. The story of Triangle is now more relevant than ever, and activism matters. Because as we know from Triangle, government does the right thing when we force its hand. Triangle is an especially apt story for Women's History Month. 129 of the 146 who died in the fire were women. Most of them were Italian and Jewish immigrants. The youngest was 14 years old. She was from Italy. And right now, plaques are being erected to remember Italian women and to remember the Italian elevator boy, Joe Zito, who was a hero of the fire. So there are plaques now in Italy in the places where these people lived to remember that they died across the ocean in New York City. And if you go, you should see them. So Triangle is the story of women activists, Frances Perkins, Clara Lemlich, and by extension, all women in the labor movement. And as Leonard told us, perhaps the most famous of all of them, at the time anyway, was the Irish-American labor organizer Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, known as the Rebel Girl. She organized workers in the garment industry. She was a free speech fighter. She was one of the founders of the ACLU. And as Leonard said, the title for the musical CD that he so generously provided me and the library is inspired by her poetry. Flynn dedicated her life to advocating for working people. Sacco and Vanzetti are just a few of those. And she's the most interesting person you never heard about. And I encourage you to learn more. Flynn's spirit, the spirit of Clara Lemlich, the spirit of all the women and girls who worked at Triangle, especially those who died in the fire, lives on in works like this one. It lives on in the annual commemoration of the fire at the corner of Washington and Green. Please enjoy this presentation, and please join us on March 24th, 2017, if you can. Thank you.